Now the topic is culture. Like other subjects, sociology, psychology, ethnological study, it's also relevant and important in geographical study. The culture comes from the Latin word colo. Colo is related to till, and basically it also comes from the word cult. Cult means related to the ownership. We are all familiar with the word agriculture that is related to augur and culture. This is the basically first and dominant cultural attributes or the example of culture. What is culture? Culture is the way of life. Okay. And basically it's a learned behavior. Culture is a learned behavior. Human beings have to learn cultural attributes. Culture is a learned behavior. Now question is, what is way of life? Way of life includes three important attributes. First one is the way of living. Second one is the way of thinking. And third one is the way of social expression. Now question is, what is way of living? The food habit, dress, clothing pattern, those are the example of way of living. Next one is the way of thinking. Way of thinking includes the philosophy, religious behavior, and the principle life attitudes of human beings. Those are the example of way of thinking. And third one is the way of social expression. Human being is a political animal. Human being is a social animal. So literature, language, uh, lyric, all are the expression of, all are the example of social expression. Here I would like to include one important attributes of culture, that is culture is always related to the homo sapiens or human being, always human being. Culture is the important attributes of human being. So culture is a, basically culture is a learned behavior. Okay, Horton and Hunt describe, Horton, Horton and Hunt describe the definition of culture. According to them, culture is everything. Culture is the everything. It includes way of life, way of living, way of thinking, way of social expression. Culture is the everything which is socially shared and learned by the member of a society. So it's a group activity. It's a social phenomenon. And according to Taylor, next one is the Taylor who defined the culture. It's a complex, it's a complex whole including the beliefs, earths, values, norms, ideas, law, thoughts, knowledge, custom, all these things, and other capabilities acquired by the human being as a member of the society. So two attributes is very important. Culture is related to the human being. It's a learned behaviors. It's acquired by the process of socialization. It's related to group activity. It's related to the community activities. So culture is a basically man-made environment. It's basically the man-made environment. Okay, and culture may be material culture. It includes the attributes and things we can define clearly, and non-material culture. Here the things and the attributes not tangible. We can take the example of material culture. That is the example of material culture is the urbanization and the construction technology. All these things are example of material culture. Non-material culture is the philosophy, thinking, lyric, all these are the example of non-material culture. Now come to the characteristic of culture. Basically culture is a learned behavior. It's learned by the human being. We can example of a learned behavior. Okay, it's not the biological. If the little baby who are very little, and they learn to speak, they learn to sing, they learn to walk by the surroundings environments, by the influence of his surroundings environment. That is nothing but a learned behavior. That is, learning is the one important attributes and one important qualities of human being. This is not biological, learned by socially, not by the individual. Culture is a learned behavior, not the biological behavior. It learned by the society. Second one is the culture is the social process. Culture related to the social things does not exist in isolation. It's a product of society. It's not related to the isolation or individual human being. It's related to the society. Third one is the culture is shared by the group of people or group of society. Fourth one is the culture is transmissible. It transmitted through the language, transmitted by the interaction, transmitted by the migration. There is lots of avenue of transmission of culture. Even through the generation to generation, culture may be transformed from one generation to next generation. So language, migration, those are the important vehicles of the transmission of culture. Next one is the culture is the combination and the accumulative effect. It's related to the time. Culture change through the time. Culture is dynamic, culture is ever changing, and culture is adopted by the human being, and culture is gratifying. Okay, and in brief, the few main attributes and characteristic of culture is that culture is unconscious, culture is integrated, culture is symbolic, culture is way of life, and culture is universal. First one is the unconscious, second one is the integrated, third one is the symbolic, fourth one is the way of life, and last one is the universal. Those are the important characteristic of culture. Okay, it's not biological, it's a social activities, it is a group activities, it transmitted through the generation to generation. It's a learned behavior, it's adaptive and dynamic, it's related to times and space factor. And now come to the component of the culture. First component is the cultural trait. What do you mean by the cultural trait? Cultural trait includes the behavior, transmission of information, symbolization, flexibility, integrity, ethnocentrism, and adaptability. Those are the trait of culture. Second one is the cultural. Second one is the cultural complex. It's large cluster of varieties of cultural traits. Suppose Indic cultural is a complex culture. It's a cluster of various religious, various language group, and various social custom. Third one is the cultural system. Cultural system is also complex one. It cultural system binds the people within the community, within their community, within their own groups. Groups are intercommunicated by the cultural custom. Here I would like to give an example that among the Hindu religious custom, there are various social customs that integrate the people and integrate the people within their own community. Then cultural region. We are all familiar with the concept of cultural realm and cultural region. It's nothing but a common cultural element. It includes the attributes of common cultural element. Then the cultural realm, it's maintain the cultural trait, maintain the homogeneity. There are 10 cultural realm of the world, just like a Latin American world realm, Indic realm, so on. And last one is the culture is globalization. It's a universal. So component of culture are cultural traits, cultural complex, cultural system, cultural region, cultural realm, culture, and globalization. It's a universal. Those are the components of culture. Now come to the culture, how it's related to the geography. So ethnological study, psychological study, sociological study, and even in philosophy, culture is very important attributes, as well as its very important attributes in geographical study. In geographical study, the frame school of thought and the concept of possibilism is concept of possibilism is related to the study of cultural study. The concept of Vidal de Laplace, the Lappe concept, Vidal de Laplace belongs to the French school of thought. He was French, is somehow related to the cultural study. Rather, it's related to the possibilism. This is related to environmental determinism, or the possibilism is nothing but the cultural attributes are related to the cultural study. Then I would like to include the name of Herbert Spencer. He was the British geographer. He also shows the path of cultural determinism. So come to the Radgel, the two important attributes, that is he wrote in his famous book Anthropology in 1924, published in 1924. He wrote that the few aspects, that is environmental determinism, but two principal theory, that is the organic state theory and the social Darwinism, nothing but the explanation of cultural study in perspective of geography. Now come to the name of Carl Oswald. Carl Oswald belongs to the American School of Thought, and his famous concept is cultural landscape theory, published in 1925. And Carl Oswald directly explained the cultural attributes related to the geographical study, and landscape is the important physical attributes solely governed and continuously changing by the interference of culture. Carl Oswald explained this. And now Hudson also supported the regional study as well as the cultural study in his book Nature of Geography 1931. So the possibilism and environmental determinism, cultural possibilism, all are related to the cultural study and get emphasis in the cultural study in geographical research and geographical discussion. Now come to the geography and culture. So we are all familiar with the French school of thought and the famous concept of French school of thought, that is La Paix concept. It's small homogeneous area in France. This area is governed by the cultural attributes as well as the physical attributes, that is the geography, and this is nothing but the study of geography and cultural ecology that is established by the French school of thought, that is La Paix concept. Second one is the cultural geography, that is landscape study of Carlo Sawyer. And third one is the new cultural attributes, that is related to the behavioral geography, music and geography, medical and geography, so on. So if we include or linked cultural study and geography, we can segment it into the three parts or three hubs. First one is the geography and cultural ecology, that is established by the French school of thought through the La Paix concept. Second one is the cultural geography and landscape concept of Carl Sawyer. And third one is the new cultural geography. It is established by the behavioral approach, music and geography, medical geography, so on. So now next come to the convergence and divergence of culture. Culture is always related to the space and time. It's related to space and time. So culture is time and space specific phenomena. Okay. So culture is ever changing and ever dynamic. Okay. It changes through the time. Ever dynamic and ever changing. It's related to the space and time. So two important attributes of culture. First is convergence and divergence. What do we mean by convergence? Okay. Suppose A is a geographical area. Here a group of people living with a specific cultural trait, and this is the B is in another geographical area. Here a group of human beings with specific cultural trait living in that area. Okay, so convergence means A come to the direction of B, B comes to the direction of, A comes to the direction of B. So there is a mixing. A tries to be similar with the B and B tries to be similar with the A. So This is the motto of convergence. Convergence means be similar to the each other. Okay, A try to be similar to B, B tries to be similar to A. So this is the convergence of culture. Okay, we can take the example of convergence of culture. Suppose in border zone, suppose Indo-Pak zone, Indian and Hindi speaking and Gujari speaking people in Gujarat and Jammu Kashmir border, there is Hindi speaking people, and in Pakistan and Afghanistan border zone, the people are speaking Pashto and Afghanistani. But in the mixing of two language in border zone, there are various kinds of dialect and language developed through the years. Urdu may be an example of that. So language is an example of convergence of culture. Suppose various kinds of dialect in the Jharkhand and West Bengal border. The language of Bankura and Purulia is accent is quite similar to the Jharkhandi, but language is Bengali. So that kind of dialect may be example of convergence of culture. Suppose convergence means two different kind of culture try to be similar. Okay, that's known as convergence of culture. We can take the example of language, various kinds of sports. Those are the example of convergence. What do we mean by divergence? Divergence means suppose A is in geographical area and B is in geographical area. So A moves opposite to B, B moves opposite direction of A. So they try to be dissimilar to each other. This is known as divergent. Moving away from each other. This is means the divergence. Okay. Okay. So within the same geographical area, one part may be convergence, other parts may be divergence. So we can take example of that. Suppose the two human groups, two human family belongs to two different ethnic group staying within the same locality, but they retain their own religious practice despite of staying in same geographical area. This is an example of divergence. Suppose A is in community and B is in community. So that part, that intersecting part, they are they are becoming similar to each other in fooding pattern, race, all these attributes. This part is known as convergence. Okay, but remaining part, religious practice and social custom, they are retaining their own trait, own cultural trait, and they are dissimilar to each other. That is divergence of culture. So convergence means be similar to each others, and divergent means be dissimilar to each other. But both are occurred simultaneously. Both are occurring simultaneously within the same human community, staying within the same geographical area. They are converging in few physical attributes like food habit, dress, all these things, and they are divergent in religious practice, social custom, retain their own cultural trait. That is the example of divergence of culture. Basically, convergence and divergence both are going hands in hands. Next one is the diffusion of culture. So culture is ever changing, ever dynamic, and it changes through the time. And culture is just like the light. Culture start journey from its origin place. Origin place of culture is known as cultural heart, and culture always radiated. Cultural always spread from its source region. Source region of culture is known as cultural heart. The source region of culture is known as cultural heart. It's the origin place or the birthplace of culture is known as cultural heart. You know, that is cultural heart. Now come to the diffusion and of culture. Okay, we can take an example of cultural heart. We are all familiar with the WhatsApp system. It comes from America. It's come from a workshop of America. That workshop for workers, they are trained together according to their job condition. They cannot verbally communicate to each other. They are searching for a mode to communicate each other in spite of in spite of be silence, and they try to find out the avenue how to communicate to each other without speaking to each other. And they invented that app, that is WhatsApp, that is very familiar. We are very familiar with that. And that is the cultural heart zone of WhatsApp. So heart is an example of origin place of the culture. So from the heart, culture diffused from that source region. There are various methods of diffusion of culture. First one, the direct diffusion. Second was the indirect diffusion, and third one is the forced diffusion. Direct, by the direct contact, direct interaction, culture is spread from source region, that is direct. Indirect, not direct contact, by the through the migration, by the media, cultural spread from one region to one region, that is indirect. And forced, by the government policy, by the government order, then that is the forced migration, forced diffusion. So what is diffusion? The way of spread of culture around the world, that is known as diffusion of culture. Way of spread of or the intermingle of culture around the world is known as cultural diffusion. Two important tool to diffuse the culture from its source region or heart region around the world. First one is the migration. Migration is very ancient and very old and primitive phenomena. We know Aryan people came India through the migration to 5,000 years back. So migration is very important phenomena to spread the culture. And next one is the colonization. Okay, it's very important attributes, colonization and migration to diffuse. Those are the tools to cultural diffusion. There are various steps to cultural diffusion. First is contagious diffusion. To the direct contact, to the direct contact, the culture spread from the one region to one region, that is cultural diffusion. Here the migration, colonization is important tools. Okay, we are all familiar with the British bakery and French bakery through the direct contact, that is the contagious diffusion of food pattern. Okay, then expansion diffusion. Expansion diffusion means culture spreading gradually from the source region to the periphery, to the nearest periphery zone, that is the expansion region. Language spread through this region. Then hierarchical diffusion. Hierarchical diffusion may be from a small town to a big city, from a mega city to the small village. We can take an hierarchical diffusion. Suppose in the world of fashion, okay, and suppose in Bombay, a superstar wear a red skirt or red scarf, then that fashion penetrated into the rural India. That is the hierarchical diffusion. Without any contact, without the expansion diffusion, through the hierarchy, by the step, the fashion or that product reach to the rural India. That is the hierarchical diffusion. Then relocation of diffusion. Relocation means the source region, heart region changes and the culture spread throughout the world. And next one is the, we can take another example of hierarchical diffusion, that is the food pattern. Also that is McDonald's and pizza, those are the spread, those food patterns spread throughout the world by the hierarchical diffusion. And those food pattern, dress pattern also diffuse through the relocation diffusion. Then stimulus diffusion. Stimulus diffusion always through the media and through the expensive campaigning, always affect on the mass, and just like a rock song become popular. This is an example of stimulus diffusion, and that is maladaptive diffusion. Last one is the maladaptive diffusion. This is adaptation by the diffusion. Okay, and we can take another example of hierarchical diffusion. Some celebrity tweeted things in our social media, then it's spread all over the world. That is the example of hierarchical diffusion. So culture may be diffused in three ways: direct, indirect, and forced. Migration and colonization is the important tools of cultural diffusion. Culture may be diffused to the contagious, that is direct contact, expansion, spreading, hierarchical by the state, small area to large cities to the small area, BIP tweeted in the social account, can be spread throughout the world. Okay, that relocation diffusion, if the Earth region is gradually changes, that is the relocation of cultural diffusion. Okay, and stimulus diffusion is through the media, through the continuous campaigning, few attributes of culture spread throughout the world. That is the stimulus diffusion. Here I would like to cite an example of that. During COVID-19, to wear a mask of India is a campaigning, that stimulus diffusion. We are all become familiar with the how to put the masks. So due to during the pandemic, so this is the stimulus diffusion. And maladaptive diffusion, it is adapted by the practice. Okay, those are the types of cultural diffusion. Those are the example of cultural diffusion. Now and convergence of culture. Okay, convergence means two similar culture become two different kind of culture become similar, or similar to become alike to each other. Convergence of culture mainly occurred by the contact, maybe direct or indirect. Direct contact is the Direct contact is a geographical area. Within a geographical area, food, language, dress pattern, due to we are influenced by the Portuguese and French bakeries after the colonization periods. We are familiar with the coat, boot, suit after the British. Those are the direct contact of the within the geographical area. Second is the social celebration, sport, and conference. Due to the social media, due to the celebration, due to this conference, attending the conference or the sports, we can adopt food pattern, playing pattern, celebration pattern due to the direct contact. Okay, within the interaction with the people. This is the example of direct contact by the social celebration, sports, and conference. Now come to the indirect contact. This is also a contact but the indirect, that is mass media. Hairstyle, fashion product gradually reached into the cornerest part of the world or the remotest part of the world through the mass media. Here I would like to conclude that during pandemic, the students who are living in the remote villages, but they can avail and communicate at the classroom which is far away from that student through the Google Meet and through the various e-communication. Those are the indirect convergence of culture, and that is information technology, net, social media maybe provide a platform to the convergence of culture. We are talking, we are thinking, we are adopting the fashion, food habit through the net, social media, and this is a platform of virtual interaction with the people. That virtual interaction of the people also responsible for the convergence of culture. And last one is the globalization. So culture is very important attributes. Culture is related to human being. Culture is a learned behavior. It's just like a sunlight. It's spread from its heart region or source region. There is a convergence and divergence of culture. Both are going hand in hand. And we can take an example of that. India is a land of diversified religious group, diversified cultural group. We are all integrated as an Indian. The sense of national integrity, this is the convergence of culture. and within the living on the same geographical space, we are retain our cultural practice, religious practice, and we are distinct from each other in the religious practice and social custom. This part is known as divergence of culture. So now at last I would like to conclude that in world has several cultural heart. Those seven cultural heart, important cultural hearts are the those seven important cultural hearts of the world are the nine cultural hearts. First one is the Nile cultural hearts. That is Nile cultural hearts. That is the Nile cultural hearts. Nile cultural hearts. First one is the Nile cultural hearts. Second one is the Indian cultural heart. That is Indus cultural heart. That is we are all familiar with the Indus Valley civilization. That is Indus cultural heart. First one is the Nile. Second one is the Indus cultural heart. Third one is the Wangho cultural heart. Wingho cultural heart. Fourth one is the Ganga riverine cultural heart. Ganga riverine cultural heart. Fifth one is the Mesopotamia cultural heart. Mesoamerican cultural heart. Sixth one is the Mesoamerican cultural heart. Mesoamerican cultural heart. American cultural heart. And seventh one is the West African cultural heart. So in world has seven important cultural heart. We are now the era of globalization. In spite of that, we have nine cultures, seven cultural heart, nine cultural heart, American cultural heart, and West African cultural heart. In spite of that, two important things of culture. Culture is ever changing, culture is ever dynamic. Two terminology is very important. First one is the acculturation, that is accumulation of culture. That is accumulation of culture. Acculturation, various diversified culture accumulated within the geographical space and time within the specific time frame, that is known as accumulation of culture.